firm's name in the chat, please do so. And of course, please mute your microphone. We will be monitoring the chat box during the webinar for any questions that you may have. And we'll use this function at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. And then at the end, you can also ask questions by unmuting your audio as well. Okay, so this webinar will cover Wyoming Water Development Office GIS data collection and management standards. Our office initiated this effort in 2016 to improve management of the GIS data, which has been developed for our level 1 and level 2 planning projects. These standards were developed by working with a multi-agency steering group to identify core data sets that are key to the business needs of our agency, as well as to other agencies. From our perspective, the core GIS data supports understanding of water use, water supply, and water project feasibility. We do appreciate your participation in the pre-webinar survey. That was helpful to get some information on who would be attending. We learned that 18 of those who were planning to participate today have previously utilized the standards, but it's new to over half of the people that were planning to participate today. So we appreciate the frequent flyers as well as the new folks on the webinar. Your responses also helped us frame the presentation today and some of the areas of emphasis. So implementation of the data modernization and compiling the incoming project data has resulted in fine-tuning and updating the data templates and standards. Currently, we are at version 3.1 for the technical memo and version 3.2 for the templates. So if you used a project over 2 years or developed a project over 2 years ago, you'll want to go out and get those current templates and the technical memo. So today during the webinar, we will cover the GIS standards, how to access and use the templates and tools, how to develop successful data deliverables, and then of course have the question and answer session. So in regards to the GIS standard, we'll jump into this first because that will ensure that your spatial data collected during your project is compiled so that the deliverables provide the data in the correct format the first time. To follow the standard, it is important to note and understand the spatial data requirements for the contract specifications, what is core data versus the, also known as the data required for your project, and then also the resources that are available to help you develop your data sets to meet Wyoming Water Development Office standards. So the spatial data requirements are outlined in the contract specifications under the scope of services under C2B project requirements. We do recommend that the contract be shared with the individuals on the consultant team who will be involved in developing the GIS if the project principals have not done so already. So there are several sections in the scope of services related to the GIS. One talks about the feature mapping. This describes obtaining the appropriate geodatabase templates for your mapping prior to completing your GIS work. Download and use the templates early on rather than at the end of your project, so you're not trying to retrofit the data into the templates. And also discuss your GIS plan with your Wyoming Water Development Office project manager. 5 geodatabase templates are available and will be specific to the type of project that you're doing, whether it's a watershed study, a master plan, an in-stream flow study, or these templates provide the organization and naming requirements for feature classes, tables, and required attributes within the feature classes. The contract also discusses the difference between core data and auxiliary data. Core data includes features which are within the geodatabase template. Whether you're creating the data through on-the-ground collection or you're digitizing or acquiring it from another source, such as a previous Water Development Office project. All core data needs to be loaded into the geodatabase template and attributed according to our GIS standards. Core data have a subset of fields required in all feature classes, which are highlighted here. Contract number, primary consultant, date modified, and accuracy are all horizontal accuracy are all required fields that need to be filled in. For the contract number, this is on the first page of your contract, and it starts with 3 numbers followed by CM. And this is not to be confused with the RN number that is on each page of the contract. The contract number is also on, and it should also be in the notice to proceed letter. So if you may not see it on your copy of the contract if you did not receive a fully executed version, because that number is assigned after the contract is fully executed. So if you've got a draft version of the contract without all the signatures, that contract number will be on there. The contract also discusses auxiliary data sets. These are features which fit into, which do not fit into one of the features classes in the geodatabase template. This might include photos, seepage areas, or line work or polygons for potential projects, since potential projects is to be delivered as a point layer. The auxiliary data can be linked to the templates or managed separately as needed for project completion. Auxiliary data sets can also be submitted as shapefiles, but even though it's auxiliary data, metadata is still required. So continuing on with the contract specifications related to GIS, in section 2 of the project requirements, it talks about formats and standards. This addresses map layouts. The project's GIS deliverables should be organized in such a way as to allow easy replication of the maps that are found in the reports. The GIS project files can be provided as Esri ArcGIS MXD files or ArcPro APRX project files, and they should be saved with relative path names to the data sources so that those links are there when the maps are open. It is preferred to get the layouts for any corresponding maps that are in your report in a single file within your map project rather than several, a single file for each map. So in the introduction, the goal of modernizing and standardizing the data collected as part of water development project was mentioned. And as we reviewed the contract language, the concept of core data sets was introduced. The framework of the core data sets in the template is based on common sets of data gathered during water development projects. The assessment data set includes key data related to water use, changes over time, and ground conditions. Included here are mapping of Rosman class, upland water sources, and irrigated lands. The hydrology data set contains information on both measured and modeled stream flow. Water projects data set includes the study area boundaries and tracks potential projects and their size, costs, and how these projects fit into Wyoming Water Development Office funding programs. The water systems data sets, it's important to consider this as data that's related to the existing environment. This includes information on the existing network to distribute water and includes both the built environment of conveyances and structures, as well as the water rights, place of use, and points of diversion associated with the water use. For your project, only a subset of these core feature classes will be required, and this will be addressed in a few minutes when we share how to access the templates. So as a reminder, the contract lays out what to do for the project GIS, and we've developed several resources which provide how to do it. So it not only serves your project needs, it has increased utility beyond your project, and it becomes a part of the statewide water development data sets. So much of what you will need to know to prepare your GIS deliverables can be found in the GIS standards technical memo. When you begin your projects or if you get stuck using the tools or looking for the templates, this is a great place to start. The technical memo was not updated in 2023, so if you already have a version 3.1 from 2021, you can continue to use that. In reviewing the table of contents, there's an introduction, which includes tips for using the standards, talks about the appropriate metadata and coordinate systems. There's sections on the templates, tools, and base layers, and it talks about the specific templates for the type of project that you are working on. The bulk of the standards describes the data model, the core GIS data sets, and provides detail on the types of GIS features that are normally collected through Water Development Office projects. And that's under the feature mapping and attributes section. Over probably a half of this document includes the appendices. Appendix A is very important for setting up your project GIS. This includes the domain definitions, which are included as drop-downs in your map package templates. Appendix B was provided by the State Engineer's Office and includes guidelines for using the e-permit database to explore water records. Appendix C provides detailed instruction for downloading e-permit point of use and point of diversion data into a spatial format. And then finally, Appendix D talks about linking fields between conveyances and structures. Again, the standards are designed to help you provide deliverables which meet the standards and do not require resubmittal. From here, I'll pass it on to Bryce, and he'll describe how to access the templates and other resources you will need via the Water Hub.
Thank you, Mabel. So yeah, my name is Bryce Marston. I've worked at Words just over a year now. And I'll talk to you today about how to access the templates, download them and import them into ArcPro or ArcMap, what you should and should not do with those templates. And then I'll talk about some base data sets that we have and some tools we created to download and import e-permit data and create shapefiles from that. So the templates location and standards documents, everything can be found at this link right here on this page, the Water Geospatial Hub. And or you can go to WWDC's website, and there's a GIS and standards link on the left that you can click on. That'll take you to this same place. And our idea with these templates is to reside this data long-term storage in a place that's accessible to us, and that could be useful for future projects. That is, I mean, over these years, we have old data being put into these templates, and over the years, we would like to have a nice geodatabase where consultants wouldn't necessarily have to do that in the future. We would have that data pre-populated into our templates. Okay. So here, if you go to that link, this is the first part of that web page, the WWDC GIS standards, and also tools and data are links down below. We'll talk about those in a second. So this first block, these standards, this is where you can find that technical memorandum, the standards document. And I would say reference that first before even contacting your project manager, because a lot of answers I think will be answered just by looking at that document. It's very dense, but there's a lot of good information in there. Also, there's a geodatabase diagram. There's one very specific thing we want you to take out of that. It's how you link different layers to different feature classes, different tables, so that we end up with related data at the end. This orientation is being recorded, and the slides are being recorded, so we'll post those on this website, so you can always go back and reference those. And also, if anyone's curious, the framework plan for what created these standards is also on this website, the 2018 GIS framework plan. So if you're curious where all this came from, that's up there too. Also, past presentations and standard documents we'll have posted on this part of the web page. So here are our geodatabase templates. There's 5 of them, depending on what your project is. If you're not sure which one of these you need to use, talk to your project manager. They're map packages, and when you download them, they'll be downloaded as a map package. Not all of these templates include the same feature classes or feature classes. Some are just not relevant to the study, so we don't include them in there. So these aren't the same templates. There are differences between these, so be sure to be using the correct one. So you go to the website, you click on our geodatabase templates, and there you click on whichever one you need, and it'll download it. There's three different ways you can import this into either ArcPro or ArcMap. You download it wherever you save that to. You can just double click it, and it should open up in ArcMap or ArcPro if you have ArcPro only. But know that if you do that, there's the default extract for that map package is going to be in the C drive under users, your username, documents, ArcGIS, and packages. So that's not always relevant. So one way is you just double click, that's where it's all going to be saved at and extracted to. The second way is in ArcMap or ArcPro, you can extract the package. You download it wherever you want and then go into ArcPro or ArcMap and under in tools, data management, package, and extract package, you can define the location that you want that to be extracted to so that you don't lose it. And the easiest way is ArcPro. All you have to do is go to insert and import that. And it's that simple in ArcPro. And instructions for those, for any of those, are on page 8 of 67 in the technical memo. All right, so here's our database structure. We have 4 core categories of data: assessment, hydrology, water projects, and water systems. And then there's 4 featured classes listed under each of those. Again, not all of those are included in every template. Depends which project you're working on. For example, drinking water doesn't have hydrology or assessment for the feature classes. So, all right, some caveats with this. What our plan is you fill in these templates, we receive them, and then we append that data into our master geodatabase template. So if you're working in this, don't add attributes to these template feature classes. The problem with doing that is there's just no place for that data to reside. So if we go to append it, it's just not going to be there. We will have lost that data. We'd still have it in your project files, but in terms of our master geodatabase, we would not have that. Also, do not modify attributes, field types, field lengths. Certain situations can cause that data to be nulled when we append. And again, we would just lose that data. So if additional attributes are needed, you have some attribute that just doesn't fit in the template, there's a couple different ways you can do it. We would suggest using the link tables. You can add attributes to those. And then we have a geodatabase diagram, which I'll talk about in a sec, that tells you how you link these tables and layers to themselves. So that's a way you can basically add an attribute without physically adding it to the attribute table in that feature class. And then the other way you can do it is the auxiliary layers. And our 2 standards for that, it has to be self-sufficient and deliverable or receivable on our end. And that would be a point, a line, a polygon feature that you just can't find where to fit that in the template. There's just no place for that data. If you are going to go that route, I would suggest, and we would like, that you don't create a bunch of point layers and a bunch of line layers and polygon layers. Just straight up, all points go into one layer. And then you can add attributes to that to distinguish one from another. Feature level data, metadata, basically. So we know what we're looking at. Okay, so here's our geodatabase diagram. And the key with this is looking at the linkages for how we link featured classes, which are the blue, to linked tables, which are the yellow. And in some cases, you need a linked table to link 2 featured classes to themselves. So this is the diagram for that. The lines between each of the features, that tells you what links to where. And also, if you look very carefully, there's a solid square and a clear diamond images or little figures next to each of those lines. So that tells you the clear diamond's many records and the solid square is a unique record. So that's a one-to-many or many-to-many relationship. So specifically, we want you to use relates when you do this. It says join on there, but there's a very specific reason why we don't want joins. And the example I'll use is points of diversions and points of use. So you could have a point of diversion that serves multiple points of use. If you use a join and you join the point of diversion to the point of use, then what's going to happen is it's going to look and see the first point of use. It's going to append that directly into the table if you're using joins, and then it's going to move on. So all the rest of the POUs are not going to be appended into that table. If you relate it, that doesn't matter. You can do one-to-many or many-to-many relationships, which is very relevant for what we're doing. So only use relates. That's just the easiest way to do this. Only use relates. And one thing I would suggest is when you're doing this, you put all your data into your layers, go ahead and build the relates, and look and make sure that everything's linked properly. Then we would request that you break those relates, because there's a technical background thing that happens with geodatabases and zip geodatabases where if you send us related data as a geodatabase, we can't break those relates, but they still exist in a table of contents table, basically. So it can get very complex. And I would just say the easiest way to do is build the relates on your end so you can see the data is linked properly to itself, then break the relates and then send us that data. Because ultimately, our master template will have those relates built into it. So we append the data in, and it should all just be linked. But if you send us related data already, it creates just another level of issue that we have to deal with. So easiest way, build the relates, make sure it works, then break them, and send it to us after that. Okay. So here's one of our core data sets. If you look at section 4.3 of the technical memo, it talks about each one of these templates. And it tells you what the feature class is, a description of what we're looking for, and some notes about that. So if you're not sure where data should reside, I would go to that section first and see if there's a place for it before adding attributes to a link table or creating an auxiliary feature class. There are 4 feature classes that are in every template. Study area is required. Potential projects as a point layer is required. POU from the permit tool, which I'll talk about, is required. And WDO conveyances. Other features might be in the template, might not, but those 4 are in every template. Okay. So last thing I'll talk about, common base data sets and ArcGIS tools. We only have a few base data sets that we give out. They're basically from the NHD layer. Watershed boundaries, streams, and water bodies. And then from the state engineer's office, we include stream names, division, and district boundaries. You go to the link right there, you can download those, import them into your project. Also, when you're searching ePermit, which we'll talk about the tool here in a second, but having the division and districts mapped and knowing where your study area is related to those could help you narrow down your search for points of diversions and points of use when creating those files. So the ArcGIS, the tools, the ePermit tool, there's a couple little things here. The POU, there's 2 parts. There's points of diversion, points of use. And you'll download points of diversions separately, and then points of use you'll download just in a bulk. But our conversion tool for points of use does not work in ArcPro. So if you encounter that, I think the easiest thing, just talk to your project manager and we'll figure out best strategy for how to deal with that. Point of diversion tool works with ArcMap and ArcPro. That one's just fine. So if you click on that link to download the Arc tool, download it wherever you want, and then go into, if you're in ArcPro, you click on Insert, Toolbox, and Add Toolbox. And it's that simple. You should import that toolbox into your ArcPro map. If you're using ArcMap, you would open the Arc toolbox, right-click on Arc toolbox, which is the first thing listed, and then Add Toolbox. Or you can use the ARC catalog pane. If you have it downloaded somewhere, you can just pull up ARC catalog, go to that directory, and you can use the tool straight out of that as well. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about this tool. There's a lot of, it's very dense in the technical memorandum, how to manipulate this data. There's basically 3 steps. First, you'll download it. Then you go into that Excel file, and we ask you to add some attributes and then edit some attribute headers. And then you use the tool in ArcMap, input that CSV in along with a couple other layers, which we include PLSS layers, township range section, which it uses to draw the POUs. So again, the POU tool doesn't work in ArcPro. The POD works in both of them. The download instructions for getting the stuff off of the permit starts on page 51. It's very dense, but I'll go through kind of quick here. It's recorded, so you can watch this back whenever you want. But the POD types, there's 4 different POD types in ePermit. And the instructions specifically ask you to download each of those separately. So we have stream diversions, we have reservoirs, springs, and wells. Each one of those have different units of measure. We have CFS, gallons per minute, acre footage. So if you download all the PODs as a bulk download, you don't know. I mean, you could probably look at it and maybe most of them tell what it is, but you don't necessarily know, especially with CFS and gallons per minute. That one could be very similar. So if you download them separately, you know the unit of measure. We would prefer that. And then the POUs, you can download those just as a bulk. But the other part to note is there may be a lot of records that you're looking at. And the key that we figured out is if there's 400 or more pages of records that you have searched and you download those, it will only download 400 pages. So be careful about how many records you have. And if you have 600 pages of records, 25, I think, on each page, then I would suggest probably using priority date to separate those out to get downloadable amounts. Just figure out kind of what's the middle ground for priority date, call that the cutoff, and then do 2 downloads of the POU CSVs. Once you do that, the instructions ask you to go through any canceled, abandoned, expired, or rejected permits, order records, or certificate records. All those should be cut out of the Excel file, pre-processing before we use the tool in ArcMap. We also ask that you remove fully adjudicated permit records because order records, certificate records, that's the fully adjudicated water right. Any permit that says it's fully adjudicated, we ask you to just cut that out. There is an Excel replace equation on page 58, which is used for one of the attributes we ask you to add to that Excel file. And the replace equation in the technical memorandum, it needed a little tweaking. And we'll figure out a way to get the, I mean, you can look up what a replace equation is in Excel and kind of figure it out, but we'll figure out a way to communicate that replace equation to you. And then the attribute titles we ask you to edit. So you downloaded the ePermit data. One of basically any special characters in the name of the attribute we need removed. So there's one that's QTR-QTR. We ask you to remove the dash out of that, so it's just QTR. There's one that's survey name, survey type, survey number, survey suffix. We ask you to just change that to survey. We ask that the acres field type it be a number, not general text field. And also water right number has a space in it. You could add a underscore, get rid of the space. And then also we would ask, once you create that, after you've pre-processed it, you run it through our tools, you do still need to add contract ID, contractor, creation, edit date, and horizontal accuracy, which Mabel talked about, and it'll be repeated again very shortly. So ePermit stuff, if you're working through it, it can be kind of messy. So if you have questions about it, talk to your project manager, and then if they can communicate with us, and through that, we can figure out a way to process the data. So with that, I'll sign off and I'll introduce Eva, and she'll talk about metadata.
Thanks, Bryce. So for the most part, everyone is following our standards pretty well now that they've been in place for a couple of years. So hopefully the resources that we provide can help make our expectations clear and help you get everything right the first round. But we are still seeing some errors that result in returning data for corrections. So hopefully the time that you are spending with us today can save time down the line. So we're going to go over a few of the items that will help you prepare your GIS data. So each year we emphasize these 9 tips that can be found on pages 2 to 3 of the standards tech memo. And I want to emphasize using the correct project template. We have different project templates for different project types, so be sure you know which project type yours is. We strongly recommend starting with the template when creating new data rather than planning to load the data from your customer's project into the template later. If you choose to set up your own geodatabase first and then migrate into our format later, you may end up doing more work and have a mismatch in the attributes that we include in our data set. So be sure to check in with your WDO project manager if you have questions. Please keep in mind that if there's a change in personnel with GIS responsibilities for your project, the new person is always welcome to review this recorded webinar and documents, but we're also happy to work through questions one-on-one with them to get them up to speed if needed. So when your GIS data is submitted as part of your draft reporting, it's going to go to your WDO project manager first, and they're going to pull out a checklist to fill out. So there's a couple of points I want to highlight that they're going to focus on. So the first thing they're going to check is if the correct project template was used, and they're going to evaluate this by comparing actual to expected core feature classes and tables. All of the feature classes in your template are supposed to be populated with data for your project. However, there may be instances where you do not include data for a specific feature class, and your project manager should be made aware of this. And there should be an understanding between you two why this data is not included. But you are still going to need to turn in that feature class as part of the geodatabase that you deliver to our office, and make sure you include an explanation in the metadata as to why it's blank. Next, they're going to look at if each core feature class has all the attributes and only the appropriate attributes. Again, as we had mentioned before, not all attributes included in the template feature classes will be populated in every case, but the majority should be. So your project managers will be looking for an explanation if important data attributes are blank. We really want this data to have a broader audience and be used for more than just this project. So we want to attach as much attribute data to these spatial features as possible. Next, they're going to look if all metadata is included. I'm going to go ahead and talk more about this on the next slide, but this is definitely a critical component of our expectations. So one of the other aspects they're going to look at is if you submit it as a geodatabase. So although, as Bryce mentioned, we provide the templates and a map package, we require the deliverables to be a geodatabase as part of an MXD or APRS. And finally, you want to make sure that all the maps that you have prepared for the report are submitted as layouts within an MXD or APRS. We have updated the wording in the contracts to indicate that either is acceptable. So when it comes to metadata, many of our past projects are lacking metadata, but metadata is extremely important. So there are several places where you can find out exactly what we are looking for in terms of metadata. So in section 2.1 of the GIS standards, you'll find the table shown on this slide that outlines each section and their components. So page 5 has metadata filled out for a hypothetical data set, so you can get a better sense of what goes where. This is carried over into the templates by including both the counts of what to include in the brackets and some example text. Just please make sure that you replace the example text with your actual metadata We've often had quite a few cases and projects being turned in with placeholder metadata. So let's take a quick look at the 5 sections on the slide. So the tag section is largely pre-populated, but feel free to add more if you think additional time to be helpful. The use limitations default language should be all that you need in most cases, but you are welcome to add any language that you may feel is necessary. Just please make sure you don't edit or delete any of the default language. The credit section is really straightforward. The summary and description sections require a bit more work, but these should still be straightforward with the examples that we have provided. I do want to point out the yellow highlighted portion of the description section. If you have added a linked table with extra attributes, we want you to spell out any data attributes that you have added in the description section. This is especially true for any coded values that you may have used. Make sure to provide a definition so the next person to look at it knows what these attributes actually are. If there are no linked tables, you can just delete this statement in your deliverable. If a core feature class is not populated, make a note in the metadata. And if you require an edit data from a third party, please note those edits in the metadata. So one problem that some consultants run into is that they require data from another source without metadata. You'll need to do a couple of steps to get that data prepared for us. So first, you'll need to make sure that you trust the accuracy of these data, since the whole point of the metadata is to ensure validity. You need to verify the quality of the data set and see if you can get any metadata from your source. If you can't find any metadata, explain where you got it from, when you acquired it, and acknowledge that despite your best efforts, you aren't able to track down any of the original metadata. If you happen to use data from a past water development project, please note the project's name, year, and as much identifying information as possible so we know exactly where that data has come from. So in addition to metadata for the feature classes and tables, we also need metadata for individual features or records. That usually includes 4 fields, but sometimes horizontal accuracy is not required. When these fields are present, they are not optional and do need to be populated. You saw earlier from Mabel in the presentation where to find the contract ID number. Contractor is intended to be the firm who creates and or edits the features, whether prime or a subcontractor. Creation edit date. So the creator will first populate this field for each new record. If at a later date someone makes a change to an individual feature, then they will change this field to reflect the edit date for the new condition. So horizontal accuracy is a coded domain, so be sure to review the tech memo for which code is appropriate for each feature. We have had some questions about these categories, specifically the accuracy assigned to each one. Note, we chose 3 main types of GPS receivers consistent with USGS standards. We indicate the accuracy that is typically expected with this type of GPS unit, but ultimately you'll have to make that decision as to which type of receiver applies to the data that was collected for each feature. So one of our 9 tips when you are creating this feature class attribute is to assign an edit date only to the features that you change. So one good way to do this without having to manually change each record is to enable editor tracking, which is a feature I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with. And it's a great way to ensure that both the contractor and creation edit date fields are updated. But just be careful when using this feature because anytime you make a wholesale change to the entire layer, such as copy and paste, it will update the editor field for all of the features. So I recommend keeping editor tracking off until you begin to make changes to individual features. You can turn it on temporarily and then back off when done with the changes. So this will help clearly distinguish individual features that have actually been changed in some way from those that were the result of basic processing actions applied to all of the features. So I'll hand it back over to Mabel so she can discuss project specific data.
Thank you, Eva. So we talked about a little bit that as you're managing your project-specific data, that there might not always be a good fit between the data that you're collecting and the geodatabase templates. So there can be uncertainty on what to do in that situation, and knowing how to handle that data. The correct way to handle it depends on whether you're working with core data or auxiliary data. With the auxiliary data, there aren't any template layers, so all of the data falls outside of the predefined core data sets. Auxiliary feature classes and table will follow whatever format you feel is best suited to organize these data. Examples of auxiliary data, as mentioned before, could be line work for potential projects, since this is a point layer in the geodatabase. You can submit your auxiliary data in the template geodatabase as a separate feature class or table, or you can keep that data separate and submit it as an auxiliary geodatabase, or you can provide the data as a standalone shapefile if that works best for you. Just remember that you do need to have metadata for all auxiliary data sets. With core data, the requirements are more specific. You should not include any extra attributes in the feature classes, as was mentioned before. If there's not an appropriate attribute that corresponds to your data already in the feature classes, check the pre-designed data tables next. These are shown next to the arrow in the catalog tree here. The geodatabase diagram is also a good reference to understand the intent of the pre-designed data table. If you don't see an appropriate attribute in either the core feature class or an existing table, then you will need to create a project-specific table to house these data. You will link this new table back to the feature class using an appropriate unique identifier, which I'll explain in the next 2 slides. You don't have to create a relationship class with this table. In fact, the database will work with just a basic ArcGIS license, which does not allow the relationship classes. But you must ensure that the table and feature classes have the correct attributes to be able to relate the data. Finally, if you do populate the data in a table, remember to add metadata to that table. So as an example, here's an example of linking a table of project-specific attributes to the conveyance layer. So the conveyance feature class from our model is shown in blue with a blue header. And this feature class contains information on existing canals, ditches, pipelines, and so on. The convey ID is a unique identifier, and you can see the other attributes in this feature class. So you may have unique attributes that aren't included, perhaps something like corrosion or wall thickness, that type of thing that's not included, but you would like to capture with your data. This is a unique attribute that we do not have as an existing feature attribute. Your unique attributes will be added to the project-specific table, and you will need to add field names for these. The convey ID field in the table will facilitate this link back to the appropriate features in the feature class. The table templates do include the standard fields to track the origin of the data, including contract ID, contractor, and creation end date. Then by populating the join GIS feature class, you will indicate which feature class this project-specific table will link to. It's a bit more work to organize the data in this way compared to just tacking on extra attributes to the existing feature class. But we do this way, as was mentioned before, so that we don't lose data whenever it is merged into the master data geodatabase. On this slide, I just want to talk you through the format for those unique ID fields. Many of the feature classes already have natural unique identifiers such as an NHD reach code, but there wasn't a good existing identifier for structures and conveyances. So the idea that unique identifiers include the convey ID and the WDO STRID ID for structures and conveyances respectively. These fields have to be populated by you for each feature that you add. The conventions for creating the data for this field is pretty straightforward. It's basically your contract ID plus a sequential number for successive records. Be sure to review the GIS tech memo to make sure you assign these numbers correctly. Another thing I wanted to just touch on briefly were are naming the feature classes and tables. It's important that when your deliverables come in, that the feature classes and table names match what's in the geodatabase template. So as an example here in the template, the canals, pipelines, conveyances, that type of thing are WDO conveyance, and your deliverable, it needs to have the same name. If you use one of the tables, it needs to have the same name as in the template as in your deliverable. There is one exception to this for the project-specific tables. In the template, they're given a generic name, and you will need to refine that name based on the purpose of that project-specific table. So you will rename the table replacing the project-specific table name with the feature class that it links to, and then the theme. So in this case, it's going to be linking to the conveyance, and the theme is photos. And then you'll add your project name to the name for that project-specific table. In this case, the project name was changed to GID Master Plan Level 1, and then you'll add the year of the deliverable. In this case, the date was changed to 2020. So keeping the same names, as we've mentioned, also applies to the field attributes. If the attributes are column headed different in your deliverable, it creates issues when we are loading this data. Your consulting firm may utilize different field identifiers during data collection, but please keep the attribute names that we have in our templates and load your data into them. Obviously, as was mentioned before, the field types need to remain the same in the templates as well. If you feel your data needs to be text versus number field or vice versa, you'll have to adapt your data to fit the template or move that attribute into a project-specific table. Finally, just a few miscellaneous things. Make sure that you find out what ArcGIS version the sponsor is using, and find out what version of ArcGIS they use. Our office is always up to date with the latest version of ArcMap and ArcPro, so you can deliver GIS projects in the latest version for us. However, if the sponsor uses an older version, you may have to provide it in that format for the sponsor for their benefit. Also brings up another point about sponsors who use GIS. This webinar has been about standards and formats that water development requires in order to compile the statewide data sets. However, sponsors may use a different format and set of standards. We want the products you create to be useful to the sponsor while also meeting our standards. For auxiliary data sets, that's no problem because those are outside of the standards. Just make sure that the format for the auxiliary data sets fit the sponsor's needs, since water development allows these to be submitted in new format. For the core data sets, you may need to provide the data in a format that benefits the sponsor while also providing the data in the water development format. This may require 2 sets of core data layers. As a reminder, potential projects are compiled as points. We have been getting those in sometimes as lines. If you're working with potential projects that are linear features, you'll need to create a point layer using the first point in each line. And if you're working with potential projects that are polygons, create a point layer from the centrum for the polygon. Please submit the original data, the lines or polygon features as auxiliary data, since they are important information to have to identify the projects accurately. You may want to create some features as separate feature classes based on the type of features. For example, in structures, you may want to create a separate feature class for valves, meters, hydrants, etc. The way the structures layer is set up is that they are consolidated into a single layer, and then they're attributed to distinguish between the various types. So those consolidate those similar features into a single feature plat. It is worth mentioning, again, that the contract language provides clear guidance on what deliverables are required for each map created for the report and other details. So please be sure to review that carefully. And finally, again, refer to that geodatabase diagram. If, for instance, you aren't sure what development type refers to, this is a quick reference to what those field definitions. The diagram is a little bit out of date, so you may see a few fields that have been added, but overall, there's been pretty minor changes to this point. So with that, just want to thank you for participating in the webinar. We hope it will help you generate and submit your deliverables correctly the first time. We'll go ahead and take a look at the chat and see if there are any questions there. Once we work through those, we'll give you a chance to raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask your questions that way. You may have questions that arise later after you've digested all this and reviewed the supporting materials. We're happy to address those questions as they come up. We do want to remind you that your Wyoming Water Development Office project manager is always the first point of contact for your project. They can help you facilitate contact with myself for technical questions as you're preparing project data and deliverables, and also help facilitate contact with WORDS. WORDS is also the direct contact for accessing existing GIS data and reports, which may give you a jump start on your data gathering. And so we'll go ahead and stop recording and take questions.